I normally, on a Sunday morning, I don't handle my business out here on the platform. But before we get to the message, I just want to say that was unnecessary. Like what happened yesterday, it was excessive, it was unnecessary. We are border states. We're in the same conference, we're in the same division. Unnecessary. And the fact that some of you enjoyed it. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. So last week of Jesus and football, because I'm tired of talking about it. The pinnacle of recognition for an athlete's career is the Hall of Fame. Now, you get to the end of your career and you get recognized as one of the greatest of the greats. Not only did you make it as a college athlete, which very few people do, and from college you made it as a professional athlete, which even fewer people do, but among professional athletes, you were the greatest of the greats, and we're going to put your name and your information and your bio into this place called the Hall of Fame, right? Baseball has a Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Football has a Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. College football has a Hall of Fame down the road in Atlanta. Probably some of you have been. It's a great place. If you haven't been, you spend a day, go to the College Football Hall of Fame. It's recognition. These are the greats right here. You need to know these names. You need to know what they did. And every year, new people get inducted, right? We have a ceremony. There's speakers. And they get a little statue of their head made. And they have to decide if they've been with multiple teams, which team am I going in the Hall of Fame for? It's an incredible ceremony. New people get added every year, and we debate, right? We argue over who should be in and who shouldn't be in, and should that person get in, should that person get in, and we all know Dale Murphy should be in by now. It's time. He needs to be in, right? Yep. So we can have all of these arguments, but we recognize this as really the greatest achievement. It's the greatest individual achievement for a person to be put in the Hall of Fame. Now, if you go to one of these, you'll realize it's not just people's names, it's not just their pictures, but there's memorabilia there. So bats and footballs that were used in big games or big moments, or this ball was used to set this record. So jerseys are in there, jerseys that important people wore. It's this tour of all the greatest moments of the sport that you care about. There's trophies from big events. You're just walking through the hall, and everywhere you look, greatness, greatness, great. This was incredible. This person was amazing. Just this wonderful museum. And you can read about their accomplishments, like how many yards they threw for, how many touchdowns, how many home runs this person hit. You could spend all day just taking in all of this information about the greatness of these players. The Hall of Fame is a way of preserving a little slice of time, right? A little moment in time, and setting it apart and saying, if you're interested in this sport, you should know about this person. You should know about this event. You should know that this happened. So it's just a preservation of this little slice of time. And it's hard to compare one slice of time to another one. Like we get in those debates and we have opinions and we can try to prove our sides, but it's hard to know. What would Babe Ruth be like as a hitter in 2022 against pitching? The game changes, athletes change. You know, we can argue. We don't have any real definitive information on that. Would Terry Bradshaw be just as good today with the rule changes and different type of offense, different athlete? We can argue about all of that. We don't know. The point of the Hall of Fame is not to say that. The point of the Hall of Fame is to say when this person played during their time, they were great. They were the greatest of the great, and you should know them, and you should remember them. The New Testament has a moment, it has a chapter that is very similar to a Hall of Fame moment. It's a moment where the author walks us down a hallway and says, if you are a follower of Christ, if you are a person of faith, you should know this person, and you should know this person, and you should know what this person does. Don't forget this. Don't forget what these people did. Now, one of the differences between the two is that in the sports halls of fame, people get in there for their athletic ability. Right? That's how you gain entrance to that particular Hall of Fame. You got to be really good at throwing something or hitting something or running really fast or hitting somebody. You got to be really good athletically. And I won't speak for you, but I don't have a shot to get in that one. Like, I am not going to make any of those ever. I do not have the skills to make that. But when it comes to this Hall of Fame that we read about in the Bible, it's actually open to anybody. Like there's not this physical ability that you have in order to get into this one. You could actually be a part of this one. I can actually be a part of this one. Here's another difference between the two. When it comes to sports and sports halls of fame, they, as I said, they measure a small window of a person's life, like a small slice of a person's life. Baseball passed a rule that you have to play for 10 years in order to be eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame. So we pick out a minimum of 10 years out of somebody's life, and we evaluate who they were as a player based on the seasons, the career that they played. Football's not like that at all. It doesn't have a requirement. As a matter of fact, Mac Speedy, which is a great football name, Mac Speedy holds the record for the fewest number of years played in the Hall of Fame. He played 3 years with the Browns during the 50s, and he's in the College Football Hall of Fame. So just a brief slice of their life, a brief window of their life, and we all can think of some names who are in the Hall of Fame, and then later we look back on their life and thought, ooh, I'm not really sure we should have put them in. I don't think we want people to know their name or remember their name or some of the things that they did. When it comes to the spiritual Hall of Fame, it's not based on a small slice of time. It's based on our whole life. The people who make this spiritual Hall of Fame, they have been dead for hundreds, some of them thousands of years before they get put in this. Like, we've seen their whole life. We know everything about them. This is a measure of all of their life as long as they live. The chapter that I'm talking about, some of you have already guessed it, Hebrews chapter 11, it's this museum, person after person, event after event, telling us, don't forget these people. Know who these people were. Here's how it starts. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. In the Sports Hall of Fame, you can get in, as I said, for a lot of different reasons. How many home runs, what your batting average was, really good on defense, how many touchdowns you threw, how many yards you rushed for, how many receiving yards you had, how many sacks you made, how many tackles, how many interceptions you had. Like, there's a lot of different ways to get into that Hall of Fame. The New Testament says there's one way into God's Hall of Fame, and it's faith. It's faith. Greatness in the kingdom of God is determined by faith. That's it. It's determined by how much you trust God, fully trust God with all things at all times completely. And he defines that. His definition of faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see, confidence in what we hope for. Faith becomes faith when I don't understand everything, when I don't see everything, when I don't know everything. Faith becomes faith when there is this gap of information. Like, I know part of this, I don't know all of this, I don't know how this is going to work out, I don't really know what God is doing. The person who wrote this chapter says that's when it becomes faith. There must be a gap in information in order for there to be faith. There must be a gap in information in order for it to actually be faith. Now, here's the problem. The quality that makes something faith is often the very thing we want to get rid of in our life. We don't want the unknowing. We want to see. We want to know. God, show me. God, tell me. God, I want to understand. We want a period at the end of the sentence. And the author of Hebrews says that it stops being faith at that point. The very thing that you're trying to get clarity on will remove any need for faith. What gets people in God's Hall of Fame is that they trust God when they don't know. They trust God when they don't see. They obey God when it isn't clear. They keep walking with God when they don't understand. It's the evidence of things hoped for. It's the things we don't see, but we trust God. Then he gives us an example. Verse 3. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Like, you don't know exactly how that happened. You don't know exactly how creation took place. You don't know exactly the process. You weren't there. I wasn't there. That's what he's saying, right? He's not saying that faith means there's no evidence. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying that faith means there's no logical reason to believe something. He's saying there's not complete evidence. There's not complete explanation. And he goes to creation. He doesn't tell us what we should think or not think or should believe or not believe about creation. He's just saying there's a lot of mystery with that. It takes faith to believe that God created everything out of nothing. That is a step of faith. That is an example of what he's going to commend in all of the people in this chapter. So after giving us that example, he starts naming names. And he introduces the names in the exact same way every time. Verse 4. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he's dead. Right? It's a reference to one of the earliest stories in the Bible. Like right after Adam and Eve. This story kicks in. Cain and Abel are brothers. Maybe you know the story, maybe you don't. They're brothers. They both bring God an offering from the work that they had been doing. The Bible doesn't tell us that God told them to bring an offering. We don't know why they brought an offering. We don't know if God gave them any instructions about the offering. All we know is Abel's offering was received by God and Cain's was rejected. And maybe it wasn't the offering itself, because the writer of Hebrews says what God saw in Abel that he must not have seen in Cain was faith. Abel trusted God. Abel walked with God. Abel was committed to God. And if you know the story, it didn't work out so well for Abel, right? Because his brother killed him over this. He got so jealous, there was such a rivalry between them that his brother kills Abel. But the writer says, even then, Abel's voice still speaks from the grave. His faith still tells a story, even though it didn't work out that great for him in this life. Listen, faith doesn't mean the story ends well in this life. Faith means believing this life isn't the end. Faith doesn't mean it all works out here. Faith means, God, I trust you even when, and especially when it's not working out here. I believe you when it's not working out here. I trust you. I'm going to follow you. And if you want to live a life that will speak after you're gone, that will speak from the dead as Abel's life speaks from the dead, you're going to have to live a life of faith. Because that's the one that continues to testify about the things of God. Verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. It's kind of an obscure story in the Old Testament, but there was this guy Enoch who trusted God so much, counted for righteousness. He walked with God, and the Bible says Enoch walked with God and was no more. And we've always taken from that Enoch never experienced a physical death. He was so close to God. He was so faithful to God that God let him bypass physical death and go straight to heaven. And hundreds of years later, the writer of Hebrews says this is the kind of faith you need. This is the kind of faith you need to revere. This is the kind of faith you need to recognize as you're walking your own journey of faith. Next example, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. Next verse, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Like Noah and Abraham, neither one of them understood what God was doing. Neither one of them saw the big picture or the final result. They just trusted God and kept going forward. They just trusted God and kept walking. Abraham didn't know where God was leading him. He just trusted God. He did this out of his faith. Then the author of Hebrews just begins naming names. I'm not going to read all of their story, but he says, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, by faith Moses, by faith the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, so the whole nation. By faith the walls of Jericho fell. By faith the prostitute Rahab. And then he names Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophet. He just starts listing people off. These people lived in faith. These people trusted God. You've heard their stories. You remember them. They were real people who walked with God and trusted God. Then there's a whole group he doesn't even name their names. He just throws a whole bunch of people in. In verse 35, there were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. He's just walking through. Remember these people? Remember these people? Remember the lives that they lived? You know why we tell their story today? Because they trusted God. They obeyed God. They walked with God. You remember this person? You remember this whole group of people who gave their life away because they believed God so fully. Verse 13, he says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. They didn't just trust God for a little bit of their lives. The writer of Hebrews says when it came to the end of their life, they were just still trusting God. They didn't understand everything, but they were still trusting God. Some of them were martyred for God, and as they took their last breath, they still trusted God. They still believed in God. They still had faith in God. There's something we need to realize about this list, and we need to admit and we need to say it out loud, and it's that the spiritual Hall of Famers were imperfect people with faith that caused them to persevere. Now, as he's holding these people up, as he's pointing to their statues and to their bios, and he did this and she did that, and they did this thing, and they were so unbelievable, I mean, if we're honest and we know a little bit about the Old Testament, we can walk through that list and see that a lot of these people were a mess. Like Abraham's faith was not always perfect. He took matters into his own hands sometimes and disobeyed God. Noah, far from perfect. Moses, far from perfect. David, far from perfect. Samson, train wreck, right? Just his whole life it seemed like. Rahab was a prostitute. He's not holding these people up to say they were perfect. They didn't do anything wrong. They always made the right decisions. They never had any trouble in their life. They were just so righteous. No, he's saying they were imperfect, but they just kept trusting God. Like they kept circling back to God is my only hope and refuge. God is true. I've failed. God has never failed. I'm imperfect. God is perfect. I'm just going to keep believing. I'm going to keep trusting. I'm going to keep walking. And he shines this light on their life, not because they were perfect, because over the course of their life, even with their imperfections and at times imperfect faith, they kept turning back to God, and they kept believing, and they kept trusting. Now, a little historical note on the book of Hebrews. This author has been writing to a group of people who are beginning to lose their faith. They're beginning to walk away from their faith. As a matter of fact, some of them already have. Some of them, because of the cost of following Christ, because of the cost of trusting God, they had walked away from their faith. And this whole book, he's saying, don't leave, don't go away, don't drift away from your faith, don't turn away from your faith. Jesus is better. Jesus is worth it. Jesus is the only thing we can depend on in our life. Don't fall away. And then he gets to this chapter and he says, you remember these people? Like as you're getting ready to walk away, remember how these people lived? They struggled and sometimes they failed and life was difficult and they lost and some of them died for their faith. But remember how they just kept trusting God. And they persevered through difficult times. And they persevered through times that they themselves were imperfect and times that they failed. But their faith just kept propelling them forward. Don't walk away, he's saying. Don't walk away. This life is worth living. And then as our Bibles make the turn from chapter 11 to chapter 12, right? There was no chapter 11 and 12 in the original writing, but our Bibles make this turn from chapters 11 and 12, where all throughout chapter 11, he's been saying, remember these people, don't walk away. These people didn't walk away. You can be like that. You can be strong like they were. Don't walk away. And then when we get to chapter 12, he makes this turn and says, all right, their lives are over. They're in the past. We have monuments to them. We can talk about them. This is now about you. This is now about the life you're going to live. This Hall of Fame is not just one to walk through and read stories about. It's not one to just walk through and go, oh, well, that's nice. Oh, they were really good. Well, he was really talented. The author says, no, you're going to be a part of this. If you've been to the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta, they have all of these interactive events, right? Like you can kick a field goal, you can run a route and catch a ball. You can announce, and it looks like you're on the set of College Game Day. You can karaoke sing your favorite team's fight song. They have all of these ways to say, come on, you participate. I want you to participate. In a similar way, the writer of Hebrews is saying, look, I don't want you to just look at these great people. I don't want you to just revere them. I don't want you to just think, well, they had a great story. I want you to know it's your time. It is your time to live out your faith. It is your time in the midst of whatever you're going through and whatever you're experiencing. it's your turn. This is what he says in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Those people lived lives of faith, but those people aren't here anymore. You're here. Those people, and he gives us this picture, they're up in the stands, right? They're in the stands of the arena, and they're cheering for you. Their lives are inspiring you. You can do this. We did it. We remained faithful to God. Life was hard sometimes. We saw brothers and sisters martyred for the faith, and we kept believing, listen, you can do this. They're not in the stands, by the way, for their entertainment purposes. Like, they're not watching us with popcorn and a hot dog, right? Like, we're not their entertainment, and they're not judging us. Like, they're not watching us and going, oh, well, you didn't run that very fast. Well, you weren't very good at that. These people whose lives are now over, who were models of the faith, they're this cloud of witnesses surrounding us saying, you can do this. Jesus is worth it. Faith is worth it. You can make it to the end. No matter what you're struggling with, no matter what you're going through, you can make it. Come on. We're in the arena now. Our faith is the one that's being tested now. And he says, look, if you're going to do this, you got to get rid of the stuff that's holding you back. You got to throw off the things that are keeping you from fully committing your life, every area of your life, to the things of God. If you're going to run a race, that's a picture, right? It's the arena or watching the games. If you're going to run a race in that setting, you're not going to carry a 20-pound weight with you while you run. Like, that'd be foolish. You're not going to wear clothes that are going to be cumbersome and might trip you up. You're going to throw that off. If you're in a race, you're not going to eat Mexican the night before, right? Or is that just me? Right? Like, if it's going to keep you from where you're supposed to go, you're going to throw that off. You're going to get rid of that. And this author is saying, what do you need to get rid of? What is keeping you from complete devotion to Jesus? What is keeping you, in spite of the struggles you may be having, what is keeping you from believing that God loves you, that He sent His Son for you, that He has a plan for you? Now, I think we need to realize in this Hall of Fame chapter, their faith led to action. Okay? He's not talking about a feeling on the inside. Like, I feel like I'm good with God. He's not talking about a feeling on the inside. He's not just talking about a belief in our head, although that's where it starts. He's not just talking about agreeing with some principles. Because they believed God, because they trusted God, they moved. Because Noah believed God, he built an ark even though he didn't have any idea what he was doing. Because Abraham believed God, he just started walking to a place he didn't even know he was going. Because Moses believed God, he faced the Egyptian rulers and led God's people out of slavery. Their faith motivated them to action. He writes, they conquered kingdoms, administered justice, shut the mouths of lions. It wasn't this quiet inner faith that they had. Their confidence in God was so great, it caused them to move. It caused them to take action, to live courageously. After he gives us kind of this hall of fame, right, of name after name after name, he finally points us to the greatest example. He at the end points us to the ultimate example of faith in Hebrews 12, verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. We don't fix our eyes on our faith. We fix our eyes on the object of our faith, Jesus. And if these other examples don't stir you, then ultimately he just says, just look at Jesus. He's worth it. For the joy set before him, he suffered for you. He endured shame and brokenness. Whatever you're going through right now, consider Jesus, he says. Consider Jesus. If your faith is growing weak, consider Jesus. If you don't understand, consider Jesus. Look to Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Right, here's the ultimate message of the book of Hebrews. Through the power of Jesus, you can live by faith. Through the power of Jesus, you can live this life. He's not holding these examples up to us as some unattainable goal that we'll never measure up to. He's saying, you can live fully committed to the things of Jesus. You can do this. If you're willing to throw aside all of those things that are pulling you back and holding you back, you can do this if you just fix your eyes on Jesus. Now that we are in the arena, now that it's our turn, how are you living? Like when the ultimate spiritual hall of fame is written, is there going to be a line, in faith, this person did this. In faith, they just kept believing, and their life wasn't perfect, and every decision wasn't perfect, and they struggled, and they asked hard questions. But when they came to die, they believed God. God, I pray that you would help us. God, I pray you would stir in us the devotion, the commitment, the faithfulness of the names that we've called out today, the names that the author of Hebrews so beautifully put in front of us. To say these people walked with God. They walked with God, and they're no different than us. No different than us. It's our turn now. It's our turn to throw aside all the things that distract us and hold us back, and to fix our eyes on Jesus. Our spiritual life ultimately will be measured simply by, did we trust God with everything? Did we trust God? Did we believe? Did we keep walking forward? Did this absolute faith in God cause us to persevere, to keep going? God, help us to have faith. Help us to have trust. Help us to have confidence even in the unseen and the unknowing, because you are faithful to us. You are always faithful to us. In Jesus' name, amen.